there was a moment when I for a second had the idea that this poem by Bertolt Brecht would be somewhat appropriate, and since we're in the Goethe-Institut, I just had to walk across the other side of the room, and there's this great library, and of course there were Brecht's collected works in the large commented Berlin and Frankfurt edition, which means it's the reunification edition. It has the old East German and the West German Brecht edition, which is published, of course, by Surkamp, the West German publisher. And the poem in question is from a 1927 collection of poems, which was called Lesebuch für Städtebewohner, something like a textbook for city dwellers, would be my translation. And I'm going to read it now in a bad, spontaneous translation into English that I'm doing on the spot here, but Brecht is a very clear author, so this is possible, although it's probably not as beautiful as the original. Separate yourself from your comrades on the train station. Go into the city in the morning with a closed jacket. Look for a place to stay, and when your comrade knocks the door, open. Oh, open the door not, but erase your traces. When you encounter your parents in the city of Hamburg or elsewhere, go past them, go around the corner, do not recognize them. Take the hat that they gave you as a present once and draw it into your face. Don't show your face, but erase your traces. Eat the meat that there is, do not save. Go into every house if it's raining and sit down on every chair that there is, but don't remain sitting, and don't forget your hat. I tell you, erase your traces. Whatever you say, don't say it twice. If you find your thoughts in someone else's thinking, deny it. Who never has given his signature, who did not leave any image, who was not there, who didn't say anything, how can he be caught? Erase your traces. And take care whenever you consider dying that there will be no gravestone betraying where you are buried with some kind of explicit writing that indicates you and the year of your death. Once again, erase your traces. This is the first poem out of 10. It was written in 1927. And later in the mid-30s, Walter Benjamin, already in exile, read it, and he called it a poem of the crypto-emigration. He said the crypto-emigration already started in the 20s. It was already trying to leave the country, Germany that is, and emigrate, but mainly in your mind, mainly in kind of preparing yourself mentally for this kind of escape. Okay, so I have here 10 little remarks and a preliminary remark. The preliminary remark is called Department of Homeland Security. The others are called Epistemology, The Police and the Subject, Love, The History of Privacy, Anticipation, Experience and Desire, Labor and Life, Cybernetics and Post-Cybernetics, Police Racism, and Notes from a Surveillance Congress. This indicates probably all the richness that was already mentioned of these 2.5 days. My job here was to reply or respond to the entire conference. So forget the title of my talk in your conference material. This was my anticipation of what could in the then future and now present of these final remarks be the relevant subject matter. It was called the world a third time how to win the war against positivism. But obviously I did not have enough data to anticipate, either because I'm a bad cyberneticist or just a chip with not enough capacity, which is a relevant question here, I think. Why did the future not come to the present in my case? War against positivism, I thought I speak in America, and there are always these wars against things, lifestyles or principles or terror or drugs. So positivism, the philosophical basis of fact collection, has now turned into the basis of data collection. It had to change for that. Its purpose was no longer to turn experiences with nature into facts for industrialization, as in the 19th century, but to turn observations of lifestyles and biological life into data for post-Fordist valorization and political control. And of course, I don't know how to win wars. What did I think? Then I realized it's also some kind of a German-American thing here going on. So Berlin has become an exile place for prominent US-American activists. This also became the storyline of the new season of Homeland. There you have these idiotically pacifist Germans, and they don't understand how serious the war against terror has become, and the idiotically data-protective Germans. And they are so resistant and powerful against the humble and friendly CIA characters that they can successfully insist the American ambassador to step back. Whereas the real Americans in Berlin were all the time protecting Kreuzberg by preemptive executions of Turkish women. In reality, of course, not even the receptionist or the cleaning personnel had to step back from the American fortress on Pariser Platz, and German planes are in Syria, or soon will be. On the other hand, to indicate this criticism of this American perspective in Homeland, I don't know if I would do the same thing in Germany, because in Germany now, the criticism of the US has also become a big thing in the right wing. First chapter, epistemology. All these chapters are referring to all these talks. You know, I mean, I'm constantly referring to the talk, but I'm not mentioning all the speakers or who has said what. I'm kind of turning it into some kind of aphoristic little thoughts. Epistemology, first chapter. A, God, Big Brother, Laplace demon, the ideal chronicler, and of course also the usual suspects in the usual short stories by Jorge Luis Borges. They are all not a problem. Since they collect all data and in consequence know everything, therefore they cannot evaluate the data. For them, the data all have the same value. They want them all. They're kind of pansexual in their data collection. They have no preferences, they have no interest. If they had an interest, they would not collect all data, but in respect to an expected outcome. So states are only dangerous to us when they are driven by the desire of an ideology that tells them who is their enemy. Unfortunately, that is more often the case than not. Business is always dangerous because it always has a goal and interest. The condition of omniscience is being able to be bored. And God can be bored. Everybody knows how boring the collection of data is already in small dosages. If we remember how in school the acquisition of language abilities, it is always interesting to learn grammar, how to work something. You have to understand the language. But then you also have to learn words, one by the other. You can just only learn them by heart, which is completely boring, because you have already understood the concept of what a word is. So it doesn't make sense to know a second word or to learn by heart a second word. This is no longer intelligent learning. This is boring learning. Learning without the necessity to understand what you learn because you already have understood the concept is inhuman. Only machines can do it. And only machines can thus become God. But why should they? B, machines can well be used for certain functions that are defined outside of their construction. as is the case with most machines and programs, observe cardio data of a patient and make some noise when they are below X. In the realm of cardio data of patient X, they know everything. They don't know that there's an outside world where they also could find relevant what the owner of this heart had for breakfast or if the heart was broken. C, classical interested observation is what scientists and detectives do, the heroes of the Enlightenment and its novels. They exist in two versions. As external observers, heroic but melancholic, because condemned to exteriority. They cannot take part in the life, so they have to be melancholic. And as implicated observers, torn apart, schizoid, drunk, but effective. These are the heroes of the more contemporary crime movies and novels. Their subjectivity is the incorporated principle of interested observation and the human limits of observation between boredom and endless self-reflexivity. D, the current situation, is the result of some negative dialectics of these characters. It is interested machines. They collect everything, but they have an interest. They cannot be bored, privilege of the machine and the god, and they know which data can be valorized or used. That is bad. Second chapter, the police and the subject. The individual subject was an invention by the police. A few people say that, it's not my idea. The concept of police requires one subject that is still the same after he or she had done something and does not become, as Martin Kippenberger used to say on the next morning, someone else with my fingerprints. The variability and mobility, the changes and instabilities we know from modern life and its novels, the self-invention of famous in postmodernism, and the normative self-optimization of today, the body cells that are completely new every 7 years, all this make this task very complicated. The subject as constant vessel for inconstant individual life stories is also important for social trust and the idea of the representative, the politician, even the star, anyone we make social contracts with. But different from the police, we only do trust an individual if it, like our friend Gandhi, has an interiority which we cannot control, but that can authenticate the expression of intentions by the representative. We would never sign a relevant, with we I mean now this kind of idealized human actors, we would never sign a relevant social contract based on data collections. But the subject with interiority is to be socially replaced by the subject with data trace. On both sides. That's why no one trusts a politician or other representatives anymore. We assume that they are just like us, just to some like our data traces. The definition of secret, of course, is completely different in these two cases. A hidden datum or a hidden account versus a sphere of hiding, a way of life of hiding, of being with oneself. Maybe the difference between flat secrets and deep secrets. The collection of data produces flat subjectivities. Third, love. The meaning of love is to be delighted by someone's uncontrollable interiority, as it produces unintentional symptoms, as it shines. When love goes bad, we switch in the police mode, looking for data traces. I know you deceived me, but here's a surprise. I can see for miles and miles. I can see for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. Oh yeah, unquote. 1967, this could be sung by a proud, long-haired, curly macho like Roger Daltrey. Some 16 years later, the creepy Sting from the band The Police sang, "Every step you take, I'll be watching you." Today, the stalker has a very bad press. No one is longer proud to be a stalker. It is one of the characters from popular imagination everyone is looking down upon and everyone is afraid of. The cancer of social relations. At the same time, total surveillance and control is practiced by more and more parents of today. Parental love has become a permanent stalking of the war zone called kindergarten, educating more subjects without interiority. 4, the history of privacy. In the 1970s, I moved into my first commune. There was a faction among the commune members who wanted to get rid of doors, especially from the bathroom and the sleeping rooms. Those were the zones in which the petit bourgeois ideal of privacy was celebrated, as we were saying then. In 1977, this was a little bit later, I think 75, the story takes place in 75, but in 1977, the BKA, the German equivalent of the FBI, practiced its so-called Rasterfahndung, maybe to be translated as grid-based, computerized searches for members and sympathizers of the RAF. The head of the BKA was the former Trotskyist, cyberneticist, and system theoretician Horst Herold. He believed in things like the care for crime. A society needs a well-cared for controllable dosage of crime, like stable red light districts. But through the Rasterfahndung, many communes were searched. Now doors were smashed, not by revolutionaries, but by the police at 5 o'clock in the morning. What is the lesson from this? That you cannot abstractly want to get rid of doors and specifically sometimes yes, sometimes no. Is that what I'm going to be talking about? Interiority and its opening up is a question of love. To privatize love can have two meanings. Closing the world of direct experience with others to petit bourgeois little couples, or to extend the numbers of those I give access to my interiority because I trust them, because, for example, they are my comrades in some of those imaginary revolutionary situations of 1975. But I have to decide about it, not the Rasterfahndung. 5, anticipation. Anticipation, including the logic of preemptive strikes, is a direct function of privacy, of closing my world or redefining the size of my trusted family or comrades. It is not new from the petit bourgeois version of my children should have a better future, with its accounts, saving accounts for education, to health regimes and self-optimization culture. It is the obedient response of the subject to its interpellation by the police, the famous saying, "Hey you there," by Althusser. If you learn that you exist as yourself by being a stable entity and not a great improviser, as people who live on the street, for example, or as slaves, you start anticipating. The data you collect are no longer for immediate use, but for storage or exchange. They become values. 6, experience and desire. I think Guy Debord's spectacle has been slightly misrepresented here. It is not what Foucault reversed to the panopticon, so where everyone looks at one person. The spectacle in Debord, I think, is basically described as the prevention of experience by the dominance of exchange value, materialized in a giant image-bearing screen. This screen sits in between the subject and possible experience. That is the spectacle, this kind of wall of images, kind of as the iconostasis in Orthodox Christianism that is between experience and the subject. Experience is located beyond the screen, erected by the dominance of exchange value over use value. We want beyond the screen. Therefore, we love to be, for example, we love to be measured and observed. We love to be turned into data because we believe in their positivism. We become real. We become positive facts by that. The Kings were singing, people taking pictures of each other just to prove that they really existed. I'm not running around the block when the battery of my sport watch is not working. I take a taxi to the Goethe-Institut when the app on my smartphone that counts my steps cannot find a satellite. Why bothering when no one looks with the loving eyes of objectivity on my sweating little body? Self-surveillance and surveillance dependence are surrogates for the transgression of the screen. It was a very beautiful scene in an otherwise not my favorite movie, Leo Carax's last film, or was it the last one, called Holy Motors, in which you have Denis Lavant in a motion capture situation where he's kind of dancing his ass off, as he usually does, and he's very good at. And it's kind of, you see that he enjoys that this motion capture technology is there to objectify this dance. But of course, it's also kind of a fight. He's trying to do more than what the technology can capture and can collect. But it's a great enjoyment, of course, this battle. And of course, this is also the scenario behind a lot of games and game culture. But here it's very visible what it's about. It's about the joys of being objectified. The contemporary narcissist subject stands between two screens, different from the 60s subject that Guy Debord talks about, that just stands before one screen, an image and not reaching experience. The contemporary narcissist subject stands between two screens. One is the permanent entertainment erected by exchange value, separating it from experience. On the other side is the mirror, supported by sport watches and diet regimes and things like that. Facebook and other communication applications offer an escape to other people in public life, also behind the screen, but located where the mirror is located. So you go through the screen, or that is the promise. You go through the screen just as in the society of the spectacle. You want to go through the screen of spectacle, but you're not going to the screen that is kind of entertaining you with other people's stories. But you want to go through the screen that is the mirror. This is entertainment, but better entertainment. It includes me. Today's media do not have the job any longer to sedate a potentially revolutionary working class, but to mobilize a tendentially over-challenged self-optimizer to continue to actively consume and produce data about it. They are, of course, not interested in the secrets as humans or interested detectives. They just need an entertainment model to keep people going and not to commit suicide. This entertainment model is gossip and voyeurism and exhibitionism. It works very well because gossip always feels like the truth, not like fiction. In the meantime, they collect the data without intention, interest, but sell them to those who have an intention and interest. Chapter 7, Labor and Life. So we are not observed and surveyed by loving machines or a neutral omniscient demon brother, but by a system of valorization, which means we are at work. Capitalism is not over. In my book, it is defined by the gaining of surplus value from living labor. Its problem is the rise of the importance of machines with which surplus value cannot be gained. You cannot pay them less than the objectively produced because their costs tend to be standardized. This is the well-known and controversial theory of the increasing fall of the profit rate from Capital Volume 3. So you need constantly to find, you as the capitalist, you constantly need to find new areas of exploitation of living labor. One is, of course, outsourcing. The other is the valorization of life itself, of people's cultural habits, of their charm, their good looks, their casual creativity, and so on. That is the material that self-optimization regimes constantly produce and offer in a seemingly voluntary exchange for the provision of free communication infrastructure. The same life commodities are, of course, constantly sold, bought, and exploited also in non-digital service economies, also in gastronomy and tourism and so on. Chapter 8, Cybernetics and Post-Cybernetics. Cybernetics tried to anticipate social situations based on the war experience of the need to anticipate enemy movement. It assumed that per feedback it would, in a hopefully benign way, include the citizens. In order to do that, it needed elegant calculations, even complex mathematics, even aesthetics. Its central unit was a kind of fuzzily decider unit, maybe a state, somewhere in between communist and Western models. In both sides of the Cold War had cybernetics research going on in the 50s. In the Californian 60s, cybernetics discovered interiority as an important factor and developed a psychological and even esoteric wing. Hippie culture became important. And we all know that this led via some detours to Silicon Valley, which was founded by former hippies. And it's interesting in that context to see that the NSA is obviously based on heavy metal, Tolkien, and Star Wars culture, which is basically historically something like 15, 20 years after hippie culture. It's the NSA is obviously, I learned today, culturally based on, let's say, late 70s, early 80s teenage culture. Iron Maiden, early Metallica, and so on. And of course Star Wars, like everyone from that generation. I'm proud to be too old for. The difference is that silicon post-cybernetics is not driven by a fuzzily state, but by surplus value, and not based on elegant mathematics, but on algorithms which rely on the capacity of chips to constantly repeat ultra-boring equations. And again, I have to contradict an opinion that has been made here, it has been expressed here. I think boredom is not unimportant. The boredom tolerance is the most important component that post-humanists often tend to ignore when they think about objects and machines. I would say those with the highest boredom tolerance will inherit the earth, not the cool artificial intelligence. Chapter 9, police racism. Police racism is a form of surveillance, the most primitive one that we know, but with a similar task than the more sophisticated ones. Distinguish among a large group of entities, humans, a type of entity from another, suspects from non-suspects, as quickly as possible. And to use this overused metaphor again, hay and potential needles. This is basically also the meaning of the word prejudice. Judge before you properly can. Of course, racism is easy to pull apart discursively, at least today. In the 19th century, even the abolitionists were in the large majority believing racists. And they believed so strongly in their racism because they thought it was scientific, because it was based on positive data. I mean, I think it will become really problematic when the combination of boredom tolerance of computing machine and the tendency of humans to believe in the scientific adequacy of certain positive data finds a new equivalent of what was so-called scientific racism in the 19th century. That a guiding principle that would have the same pseudo-scientific plausibility for a majority of the population. Chapter 10 and last chapter, Notes from a Surveillance Congress. Normally I would have anticipated, and my anticipations are all wrong, as you've already noticed, because the data are too small, the database is too small. Normally I would have anticipated that the Congress would have failed. The definition of surveillance was far too large. What are we talking about? Espionage, laboratory experiments, or voyeurism? But it worked, and I think it was because everybody knew what they were there for. it was so multidisciplinary that everybody could feel like the representative of a specific world. Surveillance studies, art theory, philosophy per se, epistemology, criminology, artivism, activism, accelerationism, political philosophy, legal science, history, and so on. This effect to represent and, of course, also to defend a specific discipline with its milieu, in a milieu-wise very heterogenic conference, was the response to the trust one naturally experiences when one is chosen to be selected as a representative. I have used several ideas from this conference in these final remarks. Basically, none of those ideas was my idea. They're basically all your ideas. I just compiled them. Some of those ideas I have criticized, others I have used in agreement. In my milieu, people normally use endless politeness formula before they criticize someone. I really loved your insightful, beautifully written talk, but. I did not say that, but I'd say it now. I loved your insightful talks. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Diedrich. That was great, and I didn't expect it to be that great. I really appreciate what you said about the conference and about every and each of the insightful contributions of this conference. I would like to open up right away for questions and comments of all the wonderful people that are here. So, is there anybody who wants to ask Diedrich something or say something?
I'm curious kind of, I guess, about behind the screen that you were talking about, the sort of behind the screen of Debord and the notion of the kind of spectacle. And there's this kind of idea there that seems like that there is some sort of authenticity of experience that could be achieved. I said it seems there is this notion behind this sort of like the screen of Debord's spectacle, and also maybe within this relation to the lover or something like that, that there is a kind of authenticity that can be achieved, an authenticity of experience or an authenticity of the self that is beyond some sort of form of mediation or the mediation of either the state or commerce that exist somewhere there. I mean, I guess I'm kind of curious how you characterize, because I tend to think of the self as an extremely constructed entity, something that arrives, you know, not only through the kind of normative conditions of our society, but also very much, I guess, as a kind of biological and evolutionary construct as well. So I don't really see that there is ever actually a point where you can arrive at the original self, the original sort of this moment of authenticity. And there is no point at which, you know, you could break through this screen. I can see setting up alternative screens that are not maybe necessarily capitalistic in structure, but.
Well, I'm not saying that the self imprisoned between the two screens is somehow authentic or original. It's a construction. It's the self that we have. And it's not, and I would neither say it's completely shaped by its how it is programmed by culture, education, interpellation, and so on. But I'm also, of course, not saying that there is this kind of original entity that then becomes corrupted by everything later and was at once something innocent or free. But this behind the screen is not where you find authenticity, but it's where you find experience. That was the idea. Or that I think is the idea in Debord, that there was once experience that was connected to some kind of Hegelian Marxist idea of work, shaping the world by your work. That is experience. There's a response of the matter of the world towards your working it. And you can no longer do that when there is the screen of the spectacle in front of you. But the thing is that this screen of the spectacle was basically thought of as a sedating device. It was supposed to sedate a worker, an idea of the worker that had still not an authentic self, but still a very living, authentic body. And the body was dangerous because the body was needed for production, but the same body was still there after production and could do any kind of thing. So they were put into a cinema in order to sedate them, or in front of a TV after certain progress. So, but I think that is no longer the case. Although I would say that this entertainment wall can be argued that it still exists, and that this has something to do with a certain idea of the world and of outside translated into a certain form of image production. But there is far more now, this other side, or that's a potentially new side, where you're looking at yourself in relation to the responses you get from either sport watchers or your friends on Facebook. And so this is also because the screen is no longer a screen in the public world, like a cinema screen. The screen is a screen at your home. And we are, as Tony Soprano always used to say, at a situation where we eat and shit at the same place. He was always saying, you cannot do that, you cannot eat and shit at the same place. But that's what we do if we work on, if we look at a computer screen where we are entertained and work at the same time. So, and I think that the promise is now that looking into the mirror leads not to find authenticity in yourself, but to relations, to experience. So, and in both cases, we are talking about promises. In both cases, it was about promises. And promises are, and I think it's a kind of a reductionism of a certain cultural critique to consider promises always as betrayal. That a promise is something that is never kept. If a promise would be never kept, nobody would believe in it. People are not stupid. So it's promises, and there must be certain dosage of evidence that they are kept from time to time. There are experiences possible in capitalism, but this is not like this is not what keeps you going. It's not what keeps you going. It's not an active pursuit of making experiences, but you are basically looking towards the screen. From time to time, you or others actually make an experience. There's a question.
I'm not sure if it's a question, but I really liked your example with the police, you know, that when someone is spying, it could be also, you know, a proof of like exaggerated love or passion. Yeah. And at the same time, you did this example with your comrades who asked you for opening the doors. So in a way, it's also a little bit like some people who are using Facebook, they say, you know, I have nothing to hide. I'm part of this community, so I don't need to. Don't need to close my doors. But in the same time, when you're comparing this, and that's maybe a question, are you arguing also that we shouldn't perceive the problem in moral or ethical terms, but more strategically? That's why you. In different, strategically or maybe in different terms, because that's, I guess, your point why you made this comparison that we have this kind of reflex also in normal human relationships.
Yeah, I mean, a strategy always implies or assumes that we are somehow able to soberly plan our actions, and we are probably not completely unable to, but probably also overrated. Our sovereignty is overrated if you're really capable of strategy. But anyway, I mean, I think the example of Sting and Roger Daltrey is that these were examples for when love goes wrong. Because you're not supposed to spy on your loved one, not because that's something one does not do, or if you love someone, set them free. Isn't that also by the police or someone like that? So this is not an ethical thing. It's a mechanical. It's a mechanism of love. Is that you are supposed to be surprised or delighted by symptoms that you cannot produce. That you have just to the other person just shines and develops symptoms. It's not something that you can plan to do. But because you know that this is taking place in some interiority and by the rules of this interiority, in the moment when these symptoms do not exist anymore, the first thing you do is spying. And it's only the very primitive case in which this is about, oh, maybe there's another person. It's just there's something in this interiority that doesn't work the way it used to work. That's the thing. And that, I think, is kind of similar to the replacement of the value of interiority versus the replacement of interiority with data traces. But I don't know if I answered your question now. Yeah, okay.
What was just said reminded me that in the past year or so, in the New Yorker magazine, there was a cartoon where a husband and wife are in bed, side by side in bed in their pajamas, reading books or magazines, and the husband is saying to the wife, well, it shouldn't matter as long as we haven't done anything bad. And she has this kind of sad look on her face. And above their heads, where there would be like, wall lights, were surveillance cameras, one on him and one on her in their bedroom. And I love that cartoon. It kind of encapsulates it.
It reminds me of a scene in Truffaut's movie. The German title is Tisch und Bett. I think it's Vie conjugale or something, where where husband and wife are lying next to each other in bed, both reading a book, and the book title betrays what they are thinking of, what they're really thinking of, and he's reading a book called Japanese Women, but it's a completely different story.
I just have a short question. I'd like to know what, for you, the difference is between self-reflection and spying on oneself.
Yeah, spying on oneself is for me, or self-surveillance, is when I'm using my sport watch. Self-reflection is when the reflection has a different result, or has a result, that I didn't know when I started the reflection. The sport watch, of course, also comes up with a result that is different from what I expected. I was slower again today, or faster, or whatever. But this is a pseudo result, because the result is just numbers. And the result is, aha, it has taken time running around the block. Big surprise. But to overestimate or delight in these numbers is the problem. That's the problem of that's how I betray myself. Although I, of course, still enjoy it and will do it again, but this knowledge doesn't keep me from doing it. Whereas in self-reflection, I don't know the outcome. I don't know if it's numbers or the impulse to change my life, or to take drugs, or to stop taking drugs. Or
you could say that the spying, the device, iPhone or something, is kind of an assisted self-reflection. So it helps you to reflect on yourself. So you can even say that the whole NSA is a kind of an assisted self-reflection of society in itself. So you could always, I don't know what I'm going to say.
But I don't think that data are helpful in self-reflection. Data are helpful in measuring the instrumental side of my body or something like that. But it's the matter of self-reflection is that it has to take place in the sphere of interiority that is it is not. Its syntax, its language matter is not data that are processed. But of course, you can come up with a very broad definition of data. By which, like all like Oswald Wiener with his, there are always Turing machines running in your mental world, which is fine with me. But then I would again distinguish this advanced description of data from those primitive data that I get from self-surveillance, or that I get from the machines that are spying on me, because they are not, producing that.
Psychoanalysis, you
Yeah.
could say, is a kind of assisted self-reflection, which is very close to the machine already. Meaning it's not yet Watson behind it, but it's a way of assisting the knowledge of yourself, as well as the whole Marxist discourse. Yeah. That's only.
No, that I would agree, but psychoanalysis but psychoanalysis does not. It's exactly what it does. It assists self-reflection. It assists enriches the sphere of my interiority, but not by producing positive data. There are no positive data in. To go back to New Yorker caricatures, the shrink sits just next to you on the couch and makes you talk. No? He's not saying right, wrong, more of this.
Sigmund Freud was thinking that psychology was kind of a science, so he believed in positive data, actually.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, to a degree. I mean, into a certain period of his life. But I mean, this has been continued in the American school of psychoanalysis. But there I could go for the continental one.
I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the title of your talk, against positivism. Maybe I know, well, maybe it's too big at this point, but maybe in relation to some of the artworks we looked at and relating to ideas of resistance.
Yeah, I actually distance myself from the title of my talk in my preliminary remarks in order to not have to do that. But and I don't know about resistance, and except that I always feel kind of seduced by, not always, but often, when people have ideas of what resistance could be. But on the other hand, in the art milieu, it's so widespread that all kind of things are called resistant, and basically, so that I don't only have a problem with the constant overestimation of so many art productions as resistant. I also have a problem with the abstractness of the category, because it's, it depends on who's resisting against what, and yeah. But positivism, I think the idea was here originally in my original manuscript that I threw away, or that's still as data still existent. But I wanted to talk about some kind of relation between contemporary production and data positivism versus industrial production and positivism of the 19th century, and of course. Not in the sense of that there would have been a chance that if one would have only criticized Hippolytaine enough, then the Industrial Revolution would have taken a different. No, that's not my point. But just to point at connections and relations, and how the concept of data is different from the concept of fact, and among other things. That that the fact is extracted from some kind of idea of natural science in order to have a tool for constructing something that is supposed to work like nature, whereas the datum is not is not meant to be the basis of a construction, but a basis of observation, and and the decontextualization that is necessary in both cases, the decontextualization from processes is not from processes of nature, but a process from life, and that was kind of the basic ideas that I didn't follow.
Sorry, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about interdisciplinarity after this symposium? What are your thoughts on interdisciplinarity and what it can and cannot do after a symposium like this, which was so interdisciplinary, as you mentioned in your talk?
Yeah, I think that if interdisciplinarity is nothing but a very broad subject, then it doesn't go anywhere. And if interdisciplinarity is something like it leads to this kind of parliamentarist situation where basically everyone is talking as a representative of a certain perspective on a matter that is a perspective that is also sometimes grounded in a milieu-like tradition to talk about things, sometimes in a disciplinary, or sometimes also in a local, but so that you are in a way forced to some kind of self-reflexive behavior. First, you know exactly what you're going to talk about because you're talking about as the representative of that and that field. That is much different from we are all from the same field. Now we're talking about a very broad subject. Then you have this kind of people just presenting the paper they were working on anyway and saying, well, this is not really the subject matter we're talking about, but I thought it still works. And you know these kind of conferences. And that was not the case here, no? And I think the trick was that everyone, because everyone was so different from everyone else, they were forced to identify themselves back as representatives of something. So they were talking. I mean, of course, there were also difference in degrees of factuality, and there were the more sober presentations, which were highly on a specific, also application-oriented knowledge on something, and then there were others that were more philosophical and general. But also those were kind of presentations as coming from a certain milieu, background, community.